I'll be watching you every single day, and every word you say, every game you play, every night you stay, I'll be watching you. Every smile you fake, every claim you stick, I'll be watching you. I'll be watching you every single day, and every word you say, every game you play, every night you stay, I'll be watching you. Tell me what you want, tell me what you want. Tell me what you want, tell me what you want. Anywhere to find you.
All the night is my world. City lights, painted girl. In a day, nothing matters. It's the night, time that flatters. In the night, no control. Through the wall, something's breaking. Wearing white as you're walking down the street of my soul. You take my self-control. You got me living only for the night. Before the morning comes, the story's told. You take my self-control. I live among the creatures of the night. I haven't got the will to try and fight. I can't say no tomorrow, so I guess I just believe it that tomorrow never comes. You take my self-control. You take my self-control. All the night is my world. City lights, painted girl. In a day, nothing matters. It's the night, time that flatters. I live among the creatures of the night. I haven't got the will to try and fight. I can't say no tomorrow, so
A leader, a mentor, a moral compass. Tributes continue to pour in for Archbishop Desmond Tutu. South Africa is holding a week of mourning to honor the icon of the fight to end apartheid. Emmanuel Macron meets with health advisors Monday amid record spikes in coronavirus cases. The French government also set to make vaccination a requirement for restaurants and other venues. We'll hear from our Berlin correspondent how similar measures have gone over in Germany. And talks to revive the Iran nuclear deal are set to resume once again in Vienna. After months of deadlock, is any progress in sight? Well, we'll have analysis from our international affairs commentator. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom here in Paris. It's good to have you with us. He's a man many describe as South Africa's moral compass. This Monday, the country begins a week of mourning to honor the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate and icon of the fight against apartheid died Sunday at the age of 90. The week of commemorations will culminate with his funeral on January 1st. Religious leaders and politicians from across the world have been joining South Africans in sharing their remembrances of the Archbishop. Luke Schrago and Karis Garland bring us some of those reactions.
A brave leader, a father, an icon. These are some of the words being used to remember Desmond Tutu. After the outspoken Archbishop's death on Sunday, South Africans expressed their sadness at losing the man dubbed the country's moral compass, including the nation's president.
We have lost one of the most illustrious, courageous, and beloved amongst us. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was one of our nation's finest patriots.
Recognition also came from other world leaders, with President Joe Biden speaking of his broken heart and a legacy that would transcend borders. French President Emmanuel Macron said his fight for the end of apartheid and South African reconciliation would remain in our memories. Former US President Barack Obama hailed a mentor and friend, while Boris Johnson said the Nobel Peace Prize laureate would be remembered for his irrepressible good humour. In South Africa, some mourners visited his home in Soweto, while others gathered outside his former parish in Cape Town.
He was one of those people that held us together, that gave us a sense of humanity.
It's actually very sad, and I don't think not only for South Africa, but for Africa as a continent.
The Anglican Church is set to plan Tutu's funeral and other memorial services, as Cape Town's famous Table Mountain will remain lit up in purple until the ceremony.
Purple was the color of the robes worn by the late Archbishop. Along with Table Mountain and Cape Town City Hall, Desmond Tutu's former parish, St. George's Cathedral, where his funeral is set to be held, will also be lit up purple this week. Let's take a listen to Cape Town's mayor.
This evening and every night this week leading up to the funeral, we are going to be lighting up City Hall, the St. George's Cathedral, which was his seat as Archbishop, and of course our iconic Table Mountain in purple light, which was so synonymous with his tenure as Archbishop of our great city and in South Africa. And we hope that when those images go around the world, that it will serve as a wonderful reminder of this incredible life and a celebration of all that he achieved for our country and for the world in that incredible life.
Moving on to other world news. This Monday, the French president will be meeting with key ministers to discuss new COVID restrictions amid record spikes in daily infections. On Saturday, they reached 6 figures in France, over 104,000 new cases in 24 hours. Ministers are also set to review a law that would transform France's health pass into a vaccine pass, making updated vaccination mandatory to enter restaurants, cinemas, and other public spaces. Well, for a preview of life under those new measures, France can look to neighboring Germany. Earlier this month, the government there made vaccination, also considering following the path of Austria and making vaccines mandatory for all adults. For more, we can cross to Berlin and speak to our correspondent there, Emmanuel Chaz. Emmanuel, can you tell us more about the measures in Germany and how they work?
So the main measure that has been implemented since mid-November, since the new measures taken to try and curb the infections, is called 2G. So that stands in German for geimpft or genesen. That means vaccinated or recovered. And this will depend on the hospitalization rate for 100,000 inhabitants. So when it's superior to 3, which is the case at the moment, it's by 4.5 at the moment per 100,000 inhabitants. Well, this 2G is being implemented. It means that, for example, to go to the restaurant, to go to the museums, to go to shops, except for essential shops such as supermarkets, pharmacies, for example, well, you will need to show your vaccination pass or prove that you have recovered. So this also will change. For example, if hospitalization rate rises at above 6, well, you will need the 2G plus. The plus stands for either an antigen test or a PCR test. So those measures have been implemented mid-November, and on the incidence rate of the virus, well, it has simply halved the incidence rate. We were at almost 500 cases per 1,000 inhabitants mid-November, towards the end of November, pardon, and we are now by 222 cases per 100,000 inhabitants. That added to recommendations of the government to limit your social contacts have decreased the number of cases. Today, we are at around 13,000 new infections, We just have to keep in mind that Omicron is actually, gaining more and more ground and infecting more and more people. So the government is a bit worried that 2 weeks after Christmas, when we will really see the effect of Omicron, those infections rates will really increase again.
Now, as you said, Germany is expecting to see that surge in cases over the holidays, after the holidays. What's the mood been like for people there?
There's certainly a fatigue of having to comply to measures, but when you see, for example, the readiness of people to get vaccinated, especially boosted, you see that the majority of people support the government measures. There's 35% of the population which is now not only fully vaccinated but also boosted, and in there's 70%, a little bit over 70% of the population fully vaccinated. That means having had at least 2.
Talks aimed at reviving the 2015 Iran nuclear deal resume in Vienna this Monday. The deal was derailed in 2018 when former U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. and reimposed sanctions on Iran. Tehran responded by resuming and accelerating its enrichment of uranium. Well, the last round of talks earlier this month ended with no progress from European and Iranian negotiators. The U.S. has not been participating directly. Well, for more on the talks, I'm joined by our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Hello, Doug. Doug, these nuclear talks with Iran have been dragging on for months now. Can you give us a sense of where things stand?
Yeah, it's sort of like a truck stuck in the mud. The wheels are spinning and spinning and spinning. It's making very little, if any, progress. Look, these talks revived back in November after a 5-month hiatus, and that hiatus itself happened after the election of a new hardline government under a new president, Ebrahim Raisi, who brought in a new negotiating team as well. So this is now the 8th round of talks. It sounds, like I said, a little bit like eternal recurrence here. This new administration, when I say hardline, it has some very, very sharp lines in the sand that it's drawn. One, it's insisting on the lifting of all nuclear and nuclear sanctions. We'll remember that when Donald Trump unilaterally pulled the U.S. out of this deal in 2018, and let's remind our viewers, this was a deal which had been reached in 2015, which most experts feel at the time had been working relatively well. It wasn't perfect. Sure, it was flawed, but it was working at the time that Donald Trump pulled out. He not only pulled out in 2018, but a few months later, he imposed extremely harsh sanctions. And those sanctions have become sort of a be-all and end-all red line for this, the Iranian regime, past and present, but more so for this hardline regime. They want all sanctions lifted. They want the U.S. also to admit to wrongdoing in this unilateral pullout. And here's another clincher. They also want a guarantee, an ironclad guarantee that no future U.S. president would be able to do what Donald Trump did and unilaterally pull out of a deal. They're not going to get that from the U.S. The U.S. says they just cannot make such a commitment. What the U.S. does say is right now, and you can see where this is a dialogue of the deaf, they say Iran, it's in Iran's hands to choose its own path and decide its own destiny here. And the time is ticking down. Iran has enriched its nuclear capacity, as you said, and right now it's not a matter of a breakout time to make a nuclear bomb in a year, as it had been under the deal. Some experts say it's a matter of a few weeks or a few months, a much shorter time frame.
And Doug, what about everyday Iranians? What do they think about all this high-level diplomacy?
Obviously, look, that's a sweeping group, everyday Iranians, right? That's the whole country. But look, a certain demographics, especially younger generations who've grown up with nothing but nuclear talks, right, Allison? Nuclear talks in Iran, it's all we talk about. Centrifuges, uranium, nuclear arms. That's the only thing a lot of people, especially in the West, associate with Iran. And unfortunately, for a lot of Iranians, it's all they hear about, when it comes to government matters. They're sick of it. They've been going on since 2003, like I said. These latest talks seem to be going nowhere. A lot of them feel are the effects, that they are paying the price of the failure of, and forget who's to blame. Is it the U.S.? Is it Iran? Is it Europe? They're feeling the effects of the failure of both sides to reach and stick to a deal. In this case, it's the U.S. that pulled unilaterally out of the deal. And what are the effects of that? deep poverty right now and soaring inflation. The Iranian currency is the rial. It has been plunging as the dollar becomes more and more strong against the rial. And a lot of them, just basic foodstuffs and life, it is extremely difficult. So they see these crippling sanctions. They see hardline leaders who are just saber-rattling and politically posturing from a lot of their views. It's, a lot of them, yeah, sure, continue to support their government. There are a lot of others who actually blame their own political leaders, say that they are basically making the Iranians' lives miserable. So there's no real consensus within the Iranian population, but if there is any sort of semblance of agreement, it's that they're fed up with nuclear talks. They want them to be over, even if there is a minority that takes pride in the fact that Iran stands up to the West and is continuing its nuclear program. Most young people want to see the end of it. They want to see the back of these nuclear talks. They want to have normal lives, get on with it without having sanctions looming over them like a Damocles sword every day of their lives.
Hopefully something constructive will finally come out of these talks. You'll, of course, be following them for us. Douglas Herbert, our international affairs commentator, thank you very much. Israel has approved a $317 million plan that aims to double the population of settlers in the Golan Heights. Israel annexed the territory from Syria over 40 years ago, but its sovereignty there is not recognized by most of the international community. The plan announced by right-wing Prime Minister Naftali Bennett aims to build over 7,000 new settler homes in the region over the next 5 years. China has replaced the local leader who oversaw a crackdown on ethnic Uyghurs and other Muslims in the Xinjiang region. Chen Quanguo is widely considered to be the senior official responsible for that crackdown, but as Yuka Roye explains, it's not clear if his replacement signals any change to Beijing's approach.
From Tibet to Xinjiang, Chen Quanguo was Beijing's man for controlling what the Communist Party saw as ethnic unrest. He served as party secretary of the Tibet Autonomous Region from 2011, where he waged a, quote, stability maintenance campaign, beefing up the police force and clamping down on Buddhist monks and pro-independence protesters. After arriving in Xinjiang in 2016, Chen began rolling out a sweeping crackdown on the Uyghur and other ethnic minorities in the name of fighting religious extremism. Last year, the United States placed him on a sanctions list, accusing him of conducting serious human rights abuses through a comprehensive surveillance, detention and indoctrination program in Xinjiang. More than 1 million Muslims are estimated to have been detained in so-called re-education camps across the region. Chen's track record of managing restive regions has helped him move up the ladder within the Communist Party. He's currently one of the 25 members of China's Politburo and could possibly be further promoted at next year's party congress. His replacement, Ma Xingui, has been governor of Guangdong province since 2017. With a background in aerospace engineering, Ma may focus more on Xinjiang's economic development. The quiet move comes just a few days after US President Joe Biden signed into law a ban on imports from the region, including cotton, over human rights concerns.
And finally, for the first time since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, a film has made more than $1 billion at the box office worldwide. You could say it took a superhero. That film, as you see there, was Sony's Spider-Man: No Way Home, the latest from the Marvel franchise that stars Tom Holland as Spidey. It reached that $1 billion benchmark in just 12 days, tying as the third fastest film to do so. That's it from us here in the newsroom for now, but do stay with us here on France 24. More coming up soon.
The idea that Microsoft could ever compete with Sony. The idea that Microsoft could ever compete with Sony or Nintendo.
Microsoft is going to make a game console.
It was seen as a bit of a joke.
Might as well call it Nerdbox, right?
We needed to prove our credibility. This thing is going to be the most badass thing you can imagine.
Dude, we need a metal X, and it's got to have a green eye, shooting a laser out. I want it to blind people.
The game developers are not going to be tolerant of any level of bull at all.
I opened up the first machine, I'm like, what the? Oh my God, what happened in there?
Seamus is backstage soldering as the auditorium is filling up.
And then it's in front of the boss. The boss is coming on.
The Microsoft brand is on the line. The Microsoft name's on the line.
Bill's not going to be happy.
And it was terrifying.
He's screaming at us. You guys have lied to me. You guys have played me for a fool.
And he says, this is a insult to everything I've accomplished at this company.
It was terrifying. I thought my career was over.
There's a new contender in the video game wars.
Xbox is going to be the future. Truly the future of video games.
Xbox.
Taking over the living room.
Limitless, connected digital entertainment.
You guys never understood.
The company is going to face fierce competition.
Sniper!
It's a ticking time bomb.
Makes me very nervous to actually play this for you.
Xbox getting a major overhaul.
A bold vision for the future of gaming.
Meet the Microsoft Mouse Line. There's a mouse for everyone, whether you're an expert or first-time buyer. Let's start with the basics.
I joined the hardware group back in 1987. I ran it for 13 years, hired 300 people into the group, and by 1999, we were doing $600 million worth of business a year.
Rick was working for me running our hardware business. Think mice, keyboards, we had some speakers, we had this thing called Interactive Barney.
That's super duper.
At some point, Steve Ballmer shows up and says, Rick's gonna go do this business exploration. I want you to help sort of supervise and support him.
Steve Ballmer tells me Xbox is my new job and is very convincing about it. Having been in hardware all of my career at Microsoft, I need to understand how this is going to be a good business for us.
Do you ever want to make hardware? If you want to be a great software company, you have to be only a software company. You can't dabble in other things.
The idea of building a game console from scratch, the risk here was enormous.
We really understand what it is to be gamers, but we're panicking like we have to figure out how to build the hardware.
Okay, we had no idea what we were doing. None. Couldn't have been less qualified to build a console.
Everything about making a console is hard, including taking an upfront loss on the hardware. Sony, Sega, Nintendo, they design their own hardware, they manufacture it themselves, and they sell it at a loss and make a profit on games. That's how the business model works. So for Microsoft, that is an insane business to get into.
Our P&L said we were going to lose $2 billion for the privilege of maybe later on, somewhere way down the road, we'll make money. And once you started it, with all the commitments that you make trying to convince the game developers to make Xbox games, you can't really stop it.
What have you done? What madness has claimed you?
We made it the point to Steve Ballmer to say, if you guys start this thing, don't come back 6 months from now and say it hurts too much.
Any new console hoping to have even a chance of success needed to win over a group of notoriously tough critics, game developers. And getting past those gatekeepers would require Microsoft to make a flawless debut at the world's largest game developer conference, GDC.
Games sell consoles, and so in order to sell consoles, we had to win the hearts and minds of the developers.
The only place I think we could have ever announced Xbox was GDC.
The next GDC would take place in March of 2000, so the Xbox team had only 11 months to design and deliver a functioning prototype.
Time is running out for Microsoft to get on the board. If they didn't announce by GDC 2000, they were going to be ceding too much of the playing field to Sony. They had to do it.
And there was still one massive problem to solve. Who was going to build the console hardware? The plan had never been for Microsoft to do it alone.
The only way that we could actually get Xbox made properly was to go to the people that were really good at building hardware.
Rick was trying like hell to find somebody to partner with us, people had expertise that he knew we didn't have.
Companies like Dell and Compaq and NEC and Toshiba. We start these meetings, and most of the guys would look at me and go, who are you? And should I believe you or not? And I'm like, no, really, we're going to do this.
And the OEMs all,
laughed in his face. Like, we understand enough about the console business to know that all the money is made on the software. And you're coming to us and asking us just to make the hardware while you make the software. We're not that dumb.
Rick's point of view was, we have no chance of doing this ourselves. And so then the question became, how do we partner with Nintendo? Or maybe we should partner with Sega.
Sega seemed like a natural choice because of Microsoft's previous collaboration on the Dreamcast. But there was pushback against the partnership. Dreamcast had never been competitive with Sony, and Xbox needed to be unlike anything Microsoft had tried before. That left one last great hope.
With Nintendo's 64-bit technology, now Mario lives in a 3D world, and you can make him go wherever you want.
As we began to understand the business model, we really appreciated Nintendo. People don't buy consoles, they buy games. They want to play Mario, they want to play Pokemon, they want to play Zelda.
Accepting the award for Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time will be Shigeru Miyamoto.
And you look at Nintendo and you find the Spielberg of the video game industry in Miyamoto, and you go, wow, this guy's unbelievable.
Thank you very much.
I knew I could convince Microsoft to outright buy Nintendo. I mean, it would be an amazing accomplishment because it's the national treasure of Japan.
So if you buy Nintendo, you get credibility in the Japanese market. You maybe even get Miyamoto.
Was there a way to make that happen? Because that would give us instant credibility.
If Microsoft were to acquire Nintendo, they would have gotten two things. One was the hardware, and second is a massive games portfolio.
From Rick's point of view, if you could acquire Nintendo, you would immediately have access to the best game library in the world, full stop. So I made an introduction to the people that ran Nintendo of America, told them what we were interested in, and then we made a trip to Kyoto.
And who do you think you are barging into my office?
But I could tell from the first meeting that there wasn't a chance this was going to happen. They were highly skeptical.
Guards!
They were like not even remotely interested in selling the business. I never got past square one on trying to acquire them.
That to me is the pivotal point for Xbox. Oh my gosh, we're actually gonna do this ourselves. And that scared the crap out of us. Because once it became a do-it-ourselves project, now the Microsoft brand is on the line, the Microsoft name's on the line, it's gonna be big and public. We're gonna have to do a lot of things new, we're gonna do hardware at scale. We are no longer in the Microsoft playbook.
An unprecedented challenge called for some change-ups and new additions to the team. Ted, Nat, and Otto left for other pursuits, while Thompson brought on someone new. Someone known within Microsoft for delivering complex projects against impossible deadlines.
One day, this guy comes into my office and he sits down and I'm like, who are you? And he says, I'm Jay Allard. I said, who's Jay Allard? And he looks at me like, everybody knows who I am, right?
We're really on the cusp of this digital entertainment revolution. So while for 25 years now, Microsoft prided itself on making the world more productive. Now our challenge is to blend that with making the world less productive, you know?
He was seen as a futurist that had a lot of credibility internally at Microsoft.
There was, you know, the famous internet memo.
He sent Bill Gates this memo that basically said, hey, Bill, we gotta wake up because this thing called the internet is coming, and it is going to transform commerce, it's gonna transform society, and it's going to be powered by broadband connections. And so we made a huge, bold bet by putting a broadband connection in the back of the Xbox. Everybody thought we were nuts.
You have to remember, back in 1999, less than 5% of the US households even had broadband.
But I remember Jay saying, we're gonna bet on the future, not against it. He had a vision for where online gaming could go and what Xbox could become. And Bill paid attention to Jay.
Well, it's very hip to be on the internet right now.
With the right team together, Xbox needed the right operating system, and that was a little tricky. And political.
It's just amazing how popular PCs are.
Windows had been the catalyst for Microsoft's meteoric rise.
Games, word processors, calculators, calendars, all running faster than ever.
Bill Gates had been won over to the team's pitch on the understanding that Windows would power Xbox. But the team knew that Xbox needed to be leaner than a PC. Windows was an all-purpose tank. Xbox needed a street racer.
One of the things that makes Windows great is that you can do lots of things at once. You can be running Word next to Excel, next to IM, next to Photoshop.
And so the idea was, if we're going to put a video game console in the living room, it's going to run Windows.
Once or twice a week, we'd get pings from all sorts of different groups around Microsoft. Office was kind of the notorious one, saying, hey, I hear we're doing a console. I hear it's going to run Windows. What do I have to do to get a build of Office running on it? I bet people would like to edit their Word documents while sitting on the couch. What's the rating of this? Like, okay, so we had to do two things. One, we had to tell these groups off. That is not what this is. If you actually think people want to sit back on their couch doing spreadsheets, it's not going to happen. At the same time, we needed a lot of code from these groups. So we had to tell them off nicely.
You're dismissed.
The services that Windows provides are really valuable, but the most important thing for games is speed. If you have an operating system taking 15% of the CPU and half the disk, you're dead.
One possible solution was to use just the Windows NT kernel, essentially the brain of the operating system. This would leave more space and flexibility for developers to program games. There was just one problem with that solution. The Xbox team didn't have access to that kernel, and the Windows team wasn't about to share it.
Here we are in the computer room that holds all of our server machines.
If we'd have gone and asked the Windows team, they would have insisted that we take Windows as is, no modifications, subject to their approval, and we just could not bring that baggage over. So we had to steal it. We stole it. We stole it, yes.
I have it running on this machine here.
We actually grabbed it at night off of a server when no one was looking, about 3 weeks before a major Windows release was going to happen. We brought it back and just started hacking and slashing stuff out of it. We had to refactor and cleave off functionality to make this box so tuned that the games could be brilliant. What started out as a 4.5 megabyte working set for the kernel got that down to about 200K. So a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what Windows is actually made it over to Xbox.
You could call this the evolutionary approach.
It becomes clear that what we're going to do is not what Bill and Steve thought they had approved.
Xbox would have the heritage of Windows, but not actually Windows itself.
The new operating system was streamlined, but nothing like the Windows-powered version the team had pitched to win the technology bake-off against Windows CE. With GDC 2000 just 1 month away, for Thompson and the team, it was the moment of truth. Time to call one final meeting. A do-or-die presentation to Bill Gates on Valentine's Day to ask if he could open his heart to a Windows Lite version of Xbox.
We had to go to Bill and tell him that what he wanted most out of this, he was not going to get. This wasn't going to run Windows.
I can't imagine how it could be better.
Oh, Bill's not going to be happy.
This was the final meeting to either approve the Xbox or cancel it. One of the highest stakes meetings I was at my whole time at Microsoft.
Which is the Valentine's Day Massacre. It's like a 4:30 meeting. Rick, Thompson, myself, Ed Freeze, Jay Allard are the 4 Xbox folks there. Steve's there.
There was a whole outer group of people too. So this room was packed.
Well, about 15 minutes late, Bill walks in.
He's holding the PowerPoint presentation, and he walks up to the table, and he throws it down on the table, and he says, "This is a insult to everything I've accomplished at this company."
Leans across at me and says, "Why are you trying to kill Windows?"
You guys have lied to me. You guys have like played me for a fool.
I start to try to argue for this, why we can't have the normal version of Windows. Bill doesn't want any of it. He doesn't want to hear it. He yells at me, shuts me down.
You got a lot of alphas in the room and all alpha males, and so there's a lot of pounding the table and you're wrong, I'm right.
By then Jay is up, he's ready to fight, and so then Jay goes in, then Robbie tries to talk to Bill, and Bill yells at Robbie.
If I'd had glasses on, I would have needed windshield wipers on him because he was spitting at us so hard and so fast.
Bill would yell at us for a while about these different things, and then Ballmer would take over on the business case, and the business case looked terrible.
By now, and the reason it's called the Valentine's Day Massacre is because all Valentine's Day activities are now off.
The candles at home, they're melting, and we're all missing dinner.
And the meeting gets to this sort of crescendo. And I said, okay, well, then let's not do it. We haven't announced anything. So that led to another hour.
And then somebody says, what about Sony?
Microsoft had owned the den and the office.
How cool!
And the thought of Sony owning the rest of the home is offensive to Bill. But the Xbox, it's the antithesis of everything that Microsoft is. It takes all of the hardware burden onto us, so it's really hard to make business sense of it. That's equally offensive. And what's going on with Bill and Steve was figuring out which of those was least offensive to them.
Bill kind of pauses and he thinks, and he says, I think we should do this. And Ballmer's like, yeah, we should do this. And then they start getting excited and it starts going back and forth. We should do this. We should let these guys do this. Bill's like, okay, we're gonna give you guys everything you asked for. Really want you to be successful in this project. You have all my support. And that part of the meeting took 5 minutes. And I turned to Robbie. I'm like, Robbie, that was the weirdest meeting I've been in at 15 years at this company.
All I remember is Kevin Bacchus coming by and basically saying, we're doing it, we're doing it.
The system was going to get built. Hundreds of millions of dollars would be spent marketing it.
Even Ballmer said, once we say yes to this, we're saying yes to this. This is real. This is as real as it gets right now. We're going to book the speech at GDC.
Bill Gates was going to go on stage in front of the world and announce it.
And it became very real when Rick Thompson sent an email saying that Xbox had been approved for an initial funding of $1 billion.
With $1 billion on the line and less than a month left until GDC, Xbox's big debut had more riding on it than ever. The team set to work creating a prototype and recruiting game developers to the platform, a monumental task for a software company that didn't have much street cred.
When it came to console gaming in the late 90s, there was no perception of Microsoft. They weren't in the picture. But when it came to the PC side of gaming, Microsoft had a reputation.
Ed Freeze had built Microsoft Game Studios and kind of organized the studio structure by genre. We had like a role-playing studio. We had a sports studio.
We were doing golf. We had a basketball title and we had a baseball title.
But it was around the time we shipped Age of Empires that we started to really get respect.
You've built a glorious empire.
It was just a beautiful game. It was beautifully scored.
Age was a great game. It was a ton of fun. Everyone loved it.
Age of Empires is a grand franchise. But if you talk to somebody that likes to play Super Mario Brothers, it's really kind of a different customer entirely. And I think that they didn't necessarily view Microsoft as being in the gaming business.
Here we go!
To recruit console game developers to its unproven platform, Microsoft had to innovate development tools that would rival the competition, making game developers an offer they couldn't refuse.
We were all about what we were giving the game developers to work with to create the greatest games ever made.
The PS2 was really, really unfriendly environment to developers. Seamus Blackley and Kevin Bacchus and Ed Freeze, they were saying, we're gonna fix this. So more of the money is going on the screen, not just trying to figure out the convoluted hardware. And that was like, really? I mean, it was like oxygen.
This was going to do things that the PlayStation can't, which meant to me, we could tell more stories, create characters that people care about, and create worlds that would be very difficult to do on the PlayStation. It's time.
We know at this point we're heading toward Xbox announcement at GDC. Game developers have to be excited so that they could talk to their other friends in the games industry and tell them, you know what? Xbox is legit.
The innovations offered in the Xbox created a promising future for console game developers. But to deliver that future, Microsoft still needed to complete a working prototype to debut on stage at the Game Developers Conference.
When Microsoft first started talking about doing a game console, everybody's willing to listen, but you need to see it.
We had to create a prototype game console that was obviously not going to be the final design of the hardware because we didn't know what Xbox was ultimately going to look like, but at the same time, looked nothing like a PC.
I had started working with the hardware guys' rapid prototyping group, which was literally in the parking garage. And they had like built a temporary structure and a bunch of parking spaces and like made it like a little office. So I went to this area where the artists were, and they were having a remote control car race in the office. around the desk, going right around. And that's how I met Horace Luke.
In a lot of ways, I work very scattermind. I don't really work on a linear path. Most of my days spent with markers and paper and just doodling. I remember the guys coming in about 6 or 7 in the evening when everybody's leaving the office with this big motherboard from the 90s. This gigantic board that had all these PCI slots on it and said, put this into something that is presentable on stage. And I still remember staring at it going, what do I do with this thing? The traditional Microsoft product was very ergonomic-centric. The mouse, the keyboard. But with the Xbox, it was very different. It was about storytelling.
There's a lot of people focused on what's this set-top box gonna look like in my living room. But that wasn't what we cared about. Horace was really interested in what was happening when you got sucked through that screen.
The role of the designer, it was how to tell the story at a glance. That Microsoft is about to go into a space that is brand new to what Microsoft was accustomed to. Telling people that this thing is going to be the most badass thing you can imagine.
I would go down and visit Horace, and there would be scraps of prototype drawings and other pieces of vision work that he would have.
The whole idea was this nuclear reactor almost, trying to hold this energy that's inside that is so intense.
He's like, dude, we need a metal X, and it's got to have a green eye, you know, shooting a laser out.
And he's always gonna use sound effects, so he's gonna be like...
I wanted to blind people, because that's kind of how Horace would talk about these things.
That sense of escape and that sense of capability and power is what we try to create with this green portal. And inside there, everything is possible. That was how we wanted people to feel when it's on stage.
You could have shown up to GDC and plugged in a PC and tried to tell people it was a console, and not a single person in the audience, I don't even think we would have believed that that was really going to be a console. So we knew we needed to show something beautiful.
People got to be able to tell in an instinct that this thing is called Xbox.
What we ended up building was a 40-pound machined aluminum X that had been buffed to a chrome finish.
These big, beautiful, shiny chrome X's, they were like these incredible sports cars.
We ended up taking literally a solid hunk of aluminum and carved it with a 6-axis CNC machine. That box took 2 weeks to carve and 1 week to polish.
Building those metal X's was very trying.
Drew and I just, after work, you know, get a can of kerosene, get a rag, and just keep buffing it. Rub, rub, rub until that thing was polished.
Somebody brought it out into a meeting and took a towel off of it and showed it to us, and I was like, that can't be in people's living rooms. And everyone's like, calm down, it's a concept.
And I'm like, okay, awesome about the green eye. How am I gonna fit the components in there? And what we ended up doing is, if you look at a PC, there's like this main motherboard. So we stuck the motherboard at this, you know, on like one angle.
We had to shave off the edge of the motherboard because it just didn't fit.
We soldered the hardware together ourselves and borrowed space in the lab.
You know, I'm sure people looked at that and they're like, whoa, it's like this polished X. It's got this, you know, amazing green eye. But it was the world's messiest PC build. Like, it was components like just jammed in there. And you're like, is it gonna work? Oh, well, you know, work this time. I guess that's the one we'll take with us to GDC.
It's sometimes possible to forget about the people who actually make the games. And so we're here in San Jose, California for the Game Developers Conference to remind ourselves that without these people, we'd still be playing checkers.
Announcing Xbox at the Game Developers Conference was like every Christmas morning rolled up together.
Video game developers are upping the ante on creating realistic games. Microsoft ups the competitive ante, announcing a new concept, codenamed Xbox.
At GDC, the idea was that Seamus would go on and basically be the demo guy, talk about Xbox, show the demos.
But this was the first time that Seamus had stood in front of an audience of game developers and gamers since the launch of Trespasser.
Before he came to Microsoft, we knew Seamus from his stint at DreamWorks on Trespasser.
It was a personal passion of Spielberg. He was very involved in it.
I'm in Steven Spielberg's office, and we're gonna do a game that could be a spiritual successor to Jurassic Park. that takes all of the principles of game design that I thought were important.
Seamus really hit on this idea of trying to use physics to simulate a world populated by dinosaurs.
I wrote a big physics system in order to make an island that was completely physically simulated.
And they say every leaf and every branch that you walk into in the woods is gonna move. And that was kind of a dream that we're like, yeah, that sounds good, but how are you gonna do that? How are you gonna make that perform? Well, the end of the story was we're not.
I made every mistake in the book. You can read about this online, all the stupid things that I'd managed in that project. And we shipped it before it was done. We shipped this broken game right into the jaws of the birth of internet gaming sites and the first fan sites. I personally just got destroyed online. And I had never seen anybody destroyed online. We know what that's like now. I thought my career was over. Everyone who was present in San Jose at the Game Developers Conference, they knew my failures with Trespasser. I remember sitting in my hotel room and I had to convince myself to just go show my face at this thing. And it was terrifying.
The day of the unveil of Xbox, I took 3 Xboxes with me, like these metal X's, 1 for the stage and then 2 for as like, you know, what happens if this fails.
We hand carry these things down in transit because these things are fragile. The idea was showing live demos, proving that we actually had nothing up our sleeves.
The game developers are not going to be tolerant of any level of bull at all.
All the things on the screen were specifically to show game developers that this Xbox was far and away better than any of the other consoles that they'd ever seen before.
And they have to be done in such a way where it's clearly interactive, clearly real, clearly running on the hardware as advertised.
We hand carry them down, we set them up, we turn them on. The first one doesn't work.
I opened up the first machine, I'm like, what the is going on here? Like something jiggling around that wasn't quite right, and you're like, oh my God, like what happened in there?
So then we set up the second one, it doesn't work either. And the third one, none of them work. Seamus is backstage soldering, trying to get everything ready as the auditorium is filling up.
He was looking on the verge of green. He just looked sick. You know, I was like, well, maybe this is stage nerves, but then I realized, you know, well, maybe it's also because all of our demo machines were completely deconstructed.
We're panicked out of our minds because Seamus went on stage to talk to the most cynical audience in the entire world.
If you took a photo from the stage of GDC, you would see, you know, gamers and game developers, and they'd all look very excited. But underneath that layer are, you know, the most critical people you've ever met, waiting to hate that thing that you created.
Kevin was underneath the stage with a video switch box that could switch from the Xbox prototype that was on stage running the demos to one that Drew was standing backstage doing everything the same way I was doing it, so Kevin could switch between the two of them in case it crashed. And then it's in front of the boss. The boss is coming on.
I'd like to ask Seamus Blackley to come on out and give us a look.
And then somebody decided we're gonna make him put on a special leather jacket that doesn't really fit him.
We don't have the box, but we do have the leather jacket, so we're ready to go.
Well, we do have one box. This is our show box. So now, as I walk out on stage with Bill G, the full weight of my failed game, Trespasser, all of my dreams in the game industry, the ridicule that I thought I was going to suffer at the hands of every game developer who saw me fail to deliver this great thing, all of that pressure came to bear. We get up there, and I run the first demo.
What I'm going to show you now is an example of advanced lighting techniques that are possible under DirectX 8.
We made a bunch of little toys that sat around your desk, like a little merry-go-round with dynamic lights.
Complicated shadows drawn across very complicated objects. There are reflections, there's environment mapping going on. And all this is happening at full hardware rate. Another great example of that is our water demo.
You can now see caustics on the bottom of a pool. All those things come from the power of processing on a per pixel basis. And that's really what the big differentiator was for Xbox.
This demo took, I think, a day to get running. And I can't underscore the importance of that enough. This takes Xbox from being a programmer-driven console to being an artist-driven console, a design-driven console. And that's really at the heart of the entire program.
The demo, it had a joke in it.
There's a classic Microsoft picture in the background.
Oh yeah, baby, that's texture resolution right there.
These were really smart demos and really ambitious. But when we saw the physics demo, I was like, wow, how's that computing?
In my high school physics class, I was scarred with the image of chain reaction as demonstrated by the old ping pong ball and mousetrap demo.
Physics was something that everybody wanted to do. Seamus had tried physics with his Jurassic Park game, and it didn't work so great. But now you were seeing those ideas actually working right.
A great example of the CPU doing all of this collision, all of this physics at the same time that the graphics processor is rendering the scene for us.
Physics is cool.
The Raven and Robot video, you could see the photorealism.
The huge chrome robot that basically was motion captured by a female character called Raven.
The level of physics simulation that was happening there, how much the CPU was being taxed, you knew as a developer, this thing was really, really powerful.
I was like, wow, we have got to get onto this box.
I was very surprised by the Xbox. I was expecting it to be kind of cool, kind of like a stripped-down PC, but what I wound up seeing very much excited me.
These demos were instrumental and so critical to the importance of Xbox and people believing in it.
To get honest, candid feedback from our peers, it was exciting because we saw the enthusiasm for Xbox and we knew that we had accomplished something.
Xbox is really going to be the king of the game stations. This is like a PlayStation 2 on steroids.
People are kind of giving us high fives, saying congratulations, and I'm like, do we actually do this?
I've never seen so much advance in one particular piece of technology before, ever.
From that moment on, we had credibility with publishers and with game developers because it was clear we did know what we were talking about.
And the next thing that mattered was that Bill Gates showed up for it. That signaled to the industry and to the rest of the world, Microsoft as a company is backing it with all of its might.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Despite all the fanfare surrounding Microsoft's Xbox, industry analysts say the company is going to face fierce competition.
When Sony's newest video game console, the PlayStation 2, went on sale in Japan earlier this week, consumers were frenzied with excitement. They snapped up nearly 1 million units at $370 a piece in the first 3 days alone.
We were at a disadvantage compared to Sony and Nintendo because we didn't have the legacy of building fun.
And Sony, you know, oh, their movies, they're cool, they're awesome. And Microsoft is like, they wear khakis and they're boring and they're Office and they're Windows. And it's like...
For over a year, the team had referred to the top-secret new console only by its codename, Xbox. But now, they had a chance to christen it with a bold new name, one that wouldn't evoke Microsoft's corporate image.
Naming is the worst part of marketing. It's the hardest thing. Nobody ever 100% loves the name. Ever. Ever.
Marketing would go to the same brand people that they would use for naming components of Windows, people who know nothing about games.
Paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to go through the most rigorous system of naming, tested against all of the right customers, and they came back with list after list.
We had hundreds of names that were generated.
Friction, Cyclips.
And they were epically terrible.
Norbo.
Infinity.
Zod, XOD. Shock Factor. Oh my God.
Fireplug.
Equestria. Vibe with a Y.
Xantra. Xantra is absolutely a blood pressure medication.
Frontier.
Og. OG.
Velvet.
Zigzag.
Zimulate.
You see, anytime you're naming something, you have to play the kindergarten game that everybody plays with their children. You know, okay, I'm gonna give my child this name. Now, how are people gonna butcher that their first day in school, right?
Carpet ride?
I was having conversations with Robbie about, you know, Robbie, Xbox is a really good name. No, you can't call it Xbox, that's a code name. We don't name products code names. We need a new name. It's like, well, okay, we'll look again. We'd look again and come back. And Xbox is a pretty good name.
I remember our final meeting with the naming experts. They came in with the perfect name. We've tested this extensively, and it's a winner. We tested it against the name Xbox, it blows it out of the water. Great, what's the name? With great fanfare, they unveil 11X. You know, because it goes to 11.
Well, it's one louder, isn't it? 11.
I looked at the marketing people looked at me, and they said, all right, we'll get on Xbox.
Where can you go from there? Where?
I don't know.
Nowhere, exactly.
There was a big debate internally about whether we should call it the Microsoft Xbox or just Xbox.
We did a lot of blind research where we would bring in gamers asking questions about what should the role of the name Microsoft be on this console. First response when we mentioned Microsoft was they rolled their eyes. A video game console from Microsoft.
What? Microsoft? Doing a console?
First of all, it would take forever to boot up, and then it would probably blue screen.
And then we asked them questions like, hey, if PlayStation were an animal, what animal would it be? It would be a lion, be the king of the jungle. If Microsoft were an animal, what would it be? It'd be a spider. It could kill you, but you also just want to step on it.
If the name of Microsoft smothered the brand, it just was going to be a non-starter.
The idea that Microsoft could ever compete with Sony or Nintendo or even Sega was seen as a bit of a joke.
Might as well call it Nerd Box, right? Bill Gates was the richest man in the world. They were such an important tech force, but what they weren't was in the living room. They weren't an entertainment company.
Among gamers, 0% of people believe we could do it.
I was a journalist, and I thought, I don't know how Microsoft is going to make a console worth.
Can you imagine walking up to Bill like, hey, you know what the biggest liability I have in my new product launch is? The name of your company.
Right.
você chega como mulher para ir surfar, com a companhia das meninas e elas me incentivando, me fazia querer crescer mais, querer evoluir mais. Não desistir. Meu nome é Bruna Alves Bessa. Antes de eu começar a surfar, eu estava trabalhando de assessoria, né? Era uma coisa de escritório, eu tinha que estar lá todo dia, né, num horário comercial. Eu não queria ficar presa num horário, eu não queria ficar presa numa rotina. Eu queria mudar para ter essa liberdade de vir quando eu quiser, criar o conteúdo que eu quiser. De filmar, eu gostava de tirar foto, eu gostava de conversar com pessoas. Então eu decidi fazer jornalismo. Bem-vindos a mais uma que você também vai contribuir. E de final de semana eu fazia gravações de campeonatos de surf. É a primeira vez que eu fui surfar, mas eu lembro que esse dia tinha bastante onda, assim. E tão focada em não morrer, em não me afogar, em não acontecer nada, assim. Eu falei, nossa, isso foi perfeito. Fiquei o dia inteiro só pensando nisso, focada em surfar, curtindo o momento. Então, eu acho que a partir do surf foi uma porta de entrada, assim, para várias coisas. Yoga, meditação, alimentação saudável, exercício físico. Então, para mim, foi uma mudança de vida. Tá dentro do escritório, vendo, né, a previsão e pensando o que me prende de estar aqui e não lá fazendo o que eu gosto. Esse é o meu destino, eu tenho que seguir isso. Eu abri mão disso, eu falei, não, pra mim fazia parte da minha saúde mental. Ou eu ia, ou eu ficava louca. Ou vai ou racha, sabe? Comecei a surfar. Eu vi que o mundo do surf era totalmente voltado para o mundo masculino. Desde roupa, desde conteúdo, desde viagens.
As a woman, yeah, you're a minority in the lineup, so you already kind of have a bit of that intimidation from the men who, at most locations, they feel like they own the wave.
Você chega como mulher para ir surfar, tem muito homem, então eles olham, eles julgam, eles estão o tempo inteiro, você tem que se provar o tempo inteiro. Quando ele vê que ela surfa bem, aí acabou todo o encanto, porque ele não quer disputar onda com uma mulher no mar. Quando você está em mais mulheres, né, no mar, o posicionamento do homem ele é automaticamente diferente. O surf me fez ter um propósito de vida. Unir mulheres, incentivar essas mulheres a fazerem o que elas querem. Eu comecei o Maré Alta. É um projeto de surf feminino. Então, é um projeto voltado para mulheres que querem aprender a surfar. Desde organização de viagens, né? Aulas, clínicas, retiros. É um projeto ligado ao autoconhecimento da mulher. O surf é uma ferramenta que a gente vai usar para isso. Então eu senti que quando eu tinha a companhia das meninas, isso ficava de uma maneira mais leve, mais divertido, assim.
O surf feminino tem ganhado espaço, né? Tanto no lifestyle como no surf profissional, né? Elas estão ganhando espaço, estão se encorajando.
A grande maioria das meninas que vão viajar com a gente são meninas da cidade. Não tem muito contato com a natureza, com o esporte. Então, primeiro tem esse estranhamento, né? De chegar e você tá literalmente no meio do mato, não tem asfalto, o chão é de terra. Então, tem esse primeiro impacto. E aí, depois, elas começam a sentir as transformações, né? E aí, depois, com o surf, né? Não sabem surfar, nunca surfaram antes. Então, a gente precisa fazer o posicionamento mesmo, né? Como que elas vão subir, mostrar essa parte do corpo, conhecer a prancha, né? É o primeiro contato que elas têm com o surf. Esse desafio de estar no mar, algumas têm um pouco de medo de mar, medo de água. Então, quebrar essas barreiras do medo da natureza, né? Começam a se conectar mais, entender mais o mar, respeitar mais. Então, todo mundo já começa a ter essa conexão.
Assim, ela me ensina todos os dias a sempre ser muito coração, a me empoderar, ser mulher, a falar, não, esse é meu lugar.
A Bruna vai estar sempre lá pra falar, vai, amiga, vamos fazer assim, a gente pode fazer assado, gosto disso que você faz, não desiste, tô com você. Tudo ela tá sempre apoiando bastante.
Quanto mais elas fazem isso, mais isso vai mudando num geral mesmo, de uma maneira mais profunda na vida delas, né? E aí a experiência passa de ser uma coisa momentânea para ser uma coisa duradoura, né, na vida dela.
I think the more women in the water, the better. And also the more programs that are being set up around the world to specifically get women into surfing is really important for the sport and for female surfing as a whole.
Eu acho que sempre quando tem união de mulheres, tudo fica melhor. Você chegar sozinha no mar é uma coisa. Quando você chega com 10, 15, 20 mulheres, é uma energia muito especial. A mulher vai se sentir mais confiante, mais livre, e eu acho que é isso que toda mulher merece.
Sooner or later, we will get to a point where the episode of history that started with humanity being the smartest being on the planet will end.
We've got a window of time when, if we get together, we can start healing some of the harm we've inflicted.
I had a few people along the way tell me that I should, not try and be an astronaut. And those motivated me to try even harder.
How do you adapt? How do you adjust?
Don't lose focus on your ultimate goal.
Within the stories, there lies the complexity, the deliciousness, and the beauty.
To not be afraid that when I'm speaking my truth that I'm gonna be canceled. That when I speak my truth, then what it will do is it will be liberating.
None of us is infallible, none of us is omniscient. It's inevitable that any of our beliefs will be false. And being open to evidence is a cognitive virtue.
Because you don't have those examples, even though you know something. To say it really simply, like society gets in the way, everything that, put on us, projected on us.
And what I realized is that we weren't represented in decision making. Why don't I become the one that tells the stories?
When we want to be our most innovative, we need to refuel ourselves. And from that place, we can be our most amazing selves.
The writing is a pleasure, so I don't feel like I'm working if I'm writing a book.
A friend of mine once said that people only think things are relative when they regard them as of very little importance.
This democratizing of information, I think, has tremendous value.
It's about using your experiences in a way that will help others to excel.
We don't feel the obligation and the conviction to use our power for people who have less privilege. Then how is this world gonna be better?
It's not about what you say, it's about what you do. Your actions speak so loud, I can't hear what you're telling me. More is caught than is taught.
So if we practice simple lifestyle habits and we take care that most of the time we are on the emotional health level.
That sleep is not an optional lifestyle luxury. It is a non-negotiable biological necessity.
Self-awareness about your emotional state is also very important in changing habits.
I think that we need to be more empathetic and compassionate as individuals because that's the only way forward.
For as much as I've seen devastation and brutality, I really have seen beauty. And so I definitely remain hopeful about our human species.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. This was so much fun.
Namaste.
Obrigado, Du.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Besos a todos.
Far out across the blue Pacific lies Hawaii's enchanted isles. A land of green valleys, sheltered by friendly hills, and beaches washed by creamy surf. But it is also America's most important outpost, crossroads of the Pacific. Your first breath of the balmy Hawaiian air seems to carry a welcome as warm and friendly as the alohas, which is part of the traditional Hawaiian greeting.
You're from Jackass, yo?
No, Hermosa.
Wait, what?
You never heard of Hermosa? Hermosa Beach.
Waikiki Beach is just as you've always pictured it.
That's Diamond Head?
Is that Queens over there?
Let's go get a my time.
What do they call appetizers here?
Really?
Yeah.
There's the Royal Hawaiian Hotel and the famous Outrigger Canoe Club, where a crew of stalwart beach boys take us for a sightseeing trip. Surfboards and canoes are launched, some by novices at this ancient art, others manned by crews of professional beach boys. Smooth teamwork enables them to keep the heavy canoe poised on the wave crest as it leaps towards shore in a cloud of flying spray. A big wave approaches. The surf riders paddle madly. Then, caught up by the wave's motion, they mount their plunging boards, shifting and treading as lightly as a ballet dancer. Descending the steep Pali roads by a series of switchbacks brings us to a region of lush tropical growth. Honolulu, on the other side of the mountains, seems far away as you enter a new world of quiet beauty.
New York City's alligator fist with Los Angeles crocodile tears. This world, they don't want us sing. They want to see us